Before we begin, if stories of history, survival, and the unseen strength of ordinary people move you, take a moment to subscribe, because what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is a memory buried beneath smoke, mud, and time. Long before cities of glass and steel, long before comfort became a normal part of life, there was a world where survival itself was the greatest achievement. Morning did not arrive gently. It crept in slowly, through cracks in wooden walls, through smoke that never fully left the air. Inside dark huts, fire embers barely glowed, fighting to stay alive against the cold that ruled every night. Families slept close together, not for warmth alone, but because space itself was a luxury. Animals rested beside them, breathing heavily in the darkness. The smell of damp straw, smoke, and earth filled every corner of their lives. Hunger was not an event, it was constant. It woke with them and followed them through every hour of the day. Bread was broken carefully, slowly, as if each piece carried the weight of survival itself. Water was drawn from muddy wells under grey skies. Every sip tasted of soil, of effort, of endurance. Nothing came easily. Nothing was wasted. As dawn pushed the fog across the village, shadows of people began to move silently between huts. No one spoke loudly. Energy was too precious. Each step toward the fields meant another day of labor that would demand everything from their bodies. Boots sank deep into wet earth. Hands, already cracked and scarred, gripped wooden tools worn smooth by years of use. Even children carried the burden of work, their small bodies learning hardship before they understood the meaning of childhood. Above them, on higher ground, the Lord's manor stood dry and untouched, a constant reminder that life was never equal. Yet despite the cold, despite hunger, despite endless labor, they endured. Because survival was not a choice, it was the only path forward. Days passed without distinction, each one blending into the next like footprints erased by rain. Time was not measured by clocks, but by seasons, by harvests, and by the slow wearing down of the human body. When the sun climbed high, its warmth brought little comfort. It only revealed the endless work waiting in the fields. Rows of crops stretched across muddy land, demanding constant attention. Backs bent under the weight of labor, shoulders tightened with exhaustion, yet no one stopped. Silence ruled the fields. The only sounds were tools striking soil, wind brushing through dry stalks, and the quiet breathing of workers conserving every ounce of strength. Children moved among the adults, carrying water buckets almost too heavy for their small arms. Their faces, smudged with dirt, carried expressions far older than their years. They learned quickly that life offered no softness, no protection from hardship. Storm clouds often gathered without warning. Rain would fall heavily, turning soil into thick, unforgiving mud. Still, work could not stop. To stop meant hunger. To slow down meant punishment. From the hill, watchful eyes observed everything. Authority did not need to shout to be felt. Its presence alone carried fear. When orders did come, they echoed sharply across the fields. Voices from horseback cut through the wind, reminding everyone who held power. Commands were not suggestions. They were laws that could not be questioned. At those moments, the air itself seemed to tighten. Movements became faster, breaths shorter, hearts heavier. Fear pushed bodies beyond exhaustion. Yet even in such conditions, quiet acts of humanity remained. A shared drink of water passed from hand to hand. A brief nod between workers acknowledging mutual struggle. A silent understanding that they were enduring together. As evening approached, the sky darkened into shades of grey and fading gold. Workers slowly returned toward the village, their steps heavy but steady. No celebration awaited them. No comfort beyond a small fire, thin soup, and brief rest before another identical day would begin. Still, they endured. Because hope did not exist in grand victories. It lived in survival itself, in the simple act of waking up and continuing one more day. Night in the village did not bring peace. It only brought a different kind of struggle. Darkness settled heavily over the land, swallowing the narrow paths between huts and turning the world into shadows and faint firelight. Inside the homes, small flames flickered weakly, casting trembling shapes across wooden walls. Smoke drifted slowly toward the roofs, escaping through gaps that had never been properly sealed. Every breath carried the taste of ash. Families gathered closely around the fire, not speaking much. Words were saved, just like food, because even talking required energy they could not afford to waste. Their eyes reflected the orange glow, tired yet alert, as if rest itself could not be trusted. Outside, wind moved through the village like a silent visitor. It rattled loose wood, whispered through broken fences, and carried the distant sounds of animals shifting in the dark. Sleep came slowly. Bodies ached too much to relax easily. Hands throbbed from endless labor. Backs stiffened from bending over fields from sunrise to sunset. Even in rest, pain remained. Yet in these quiet hours, something stronger than hardship revealed itself: resilience. Mothers checked on their children, adjusting thin blankets to protect them from the cold night air. Fathers stared into the fire, their thoughts heavy but determined. They knew tomorrow would bring the same struggles, yet they also knew they would face them again. Because giving up was never an option. Far away, on higher ground, the manor windows glowed steadily. Warm light spilled from stone walls untouched by wind or hunger. It stood as a silent reminder of the distance between power and survival. But down in the village, something else endured a quiet strength that could not be seen from the hill. It lived in shared silence. It lived in endurance. It lived in the simple decision to rise again when morning came. And as the night slowly passed, the embers of the fires continued to glow small, fragile, yet unbroken, just like the people who guarded them. Morning returned without mercy. The first light did not bring warmth or comfort. It simply revealed another day of struggle waiting to begin. Cold mist stretched across the fields, clinging low to the ground like a silent warning. Figures slowly emerged from the village, moving through the gray air with tired, practiced steps. No one rushed. Their bodies already knew the long hours ahead. The soil was heavy from night moisture. Each step sank deep, pulling against worn boots and bare feet. Tools were lifted once again, their wooden handles polished smooth by years of relentless use. Work began in silence. Metal struck earth. Hands dug into roots. Breath rose in pale clouds against the cold morning air. The rhythm of labor filled the land steady, exhausting, unavoidable. Above the fields, birds circled slowly, their cries echoing across open sky. They were free to move, free to leave, while those below remained tied to the soil that both sustained and consumed them. As the sun climbed higher, heat replaced the cold, but relief never came. Sweat mixed with dust and mud, forming a constant reminder of how completely the land demanded its workers. Children struggled to keep pace with adults, carrying bundles of crops and tools that seemed too large for their small frames. Yet they did not complain. Hardship had already taught them endurance beyond their years. From the hill, riders appeared, their silhouettes dark against the brightening sky. Horses moved confidently across the dry path above the fields. Authority arrived not quietly, but with a presence that tightened every worker's chest. Commands rang out sharply. Work faster. Move the harvest. Do not slow. The air changed instantly. Movements became hurried. Hands trembled with urgency. Fear pressed heavily on every shoulder, heavier even than exhaustion. Because in this world, failure did not mean disappointment. It meant punishment. Yet even under watchful eyes and harsh voices, the workers continued, not with hope of reward, but with determination born from necessity. They labored not for comfort, not for recognition, but simply to survive another day. And as the sun burned overhead, the cycle of endurance continued without end. By midday, the land seemed to hold its breath under the weight of heat. The sun stood high and unforgiving, draining strength from every movement. Shadows grew short, offering little relief from the relentless glare. Workers paused only briefly, gathering in small groups along the edges of the fields. They sat on overturned baskets or directly on the warm soil, shoulders slumped, hands resting heavily in their laps. Food was simple, coarse bread, sometimes hardened from days of storage, and small portions shared carefully among family members. Each bite was taken slowly, as if stretching the moment could somehow create more. Water was passed from one person to another in worn containers. No one drank deeply. They knew there had to be enough for the hours still ahead. Despite exhaustion, quiet moments of humanity appeared. A mother wiped dirt from her child's face. An older worker offered a piece of bread to someone younger. A faint smile passed between two friends who understood each other's struggle without needing words. But rest never lasted long. Soon, voices from the hill called out again. Riders circled the fields, reminding everyone that time belonged not to them, but to those who ruled above. The pause ended. Bodies rose slowly, painfully, as muscles protested every movement. Tools were lifted once more, and the rhythm of labor resumed. Afternoon winds began to move across the land, carrying dust that settled into eyes and lungs. It blurred the horizon, making the world seem endless and without escape. Still, they worked, because the harvest could not wait, because hunger could not be ignored, because survival demanded constant effort. As hours passed, fatigue deepened into something heavier, a quiet, unspoken acceptance of hardship as a permanent part of life. Yet beneath this acceptance, something stronger continued to exist, a shared resilience, a silent bond between those who endured together. Even in the harshest conditions, they remained united by the same truth that survival was not an individual struggle, but a collective one. And so, as the afternoon slowly moved toward evening, the workers continued their relentless task, driven not by hope of reward, but by the simple necessity of living one more day. As the sun began its slow descent, the light over the fields softened, turning from harsh white to deep shades of gold and amber. Long shadows stretched across the land, marking the passing of another exhausting day. The rhythm of tools striking soil gradually slowed. Movements became heavier, more deliberate, as fatigue settled deep into bones and muscles. Each step felt harder than the last, yet no one stopped until the final command allowed it. When the signal finally came, it was not met with celebration, only quiet relief. Tools were lowered carefully, hands lingering on worn wooden handles as if reluctant to let go of the work that defined their survival. Workers began the slow journey back toward the village. Their silhouettes moved through the fading light, bent and weary, yet steady. Dust rose softly beneath their feet, glowing in the evening sun. The air cooled quickly as night approached. Winds carried the smell of earth and distant smoke. Birds crossed the darkening sky, returning freely to their nests, while the people below returned to lives bound by hardship. Inside the village, small fires were already being lit. Thin streams of smoke curled upward, blending into the dimming sky. The faint crackle of burning wood welcomed the workers home. Evening meals were quiet and simple. Bowls of thin stew passed from hand to hand. Bread was divided carefully, ensuring no one went completely without. Hunger remained, but sharing made it bearable. For a brief moment, the pace of life slowed. Children sat close to their parents, listening to soft murmurs, too tired to speak much themselves. The glow of firelight softened the harsh lines of exhaustion on every face. In these fragile moments, something powerful existed, a sense of belonging, a shared understanding that they were not alone in their struggle, because even in a world filled with hardship, connection remained a source of strength. Outside, darkness fully settled over the land once again. The fields grew silent. The hilltop manor lights flickered in the distance, distant and unreachable. Yet within the small huts below, Embers glowed steadily, quiet symbols of endurance that refused to fade, just like the people who protected them. Night deepened over the village, bringing a silence that felt both heavy and fragile. The fires inside each hut burned low, their soft glow barely pushing back the darkness that pressed in from every side. Outside, the wind moved steadily across the land, whispering through empty fields and rattling loose wooden structures. It carried the distant sounds of animals and the occasional creak of worn doors shifting under its force. Inside the homes, exhaustion took hold quickly. Bodies lowered onto thin bedding made of straw and rough cloth. Muscles throbbed from the day's labor, and every movement reminded them of how much strength had been spent. Yet sleep did not always come easily. Minds remained alert, shaped by years of uncertainty. Every unfamiliar sound could signal danger. Every sudden noise stirred quiet tension within the darkness. Mothers remained awake longer than others, watching over their children with protective eyes. Fathers sat near the fading embers, staring into the weak glow as if searching for answers within the flickering light. Thoughts were heavy, filled with worry about the next harvest, the next command, the next hardship that might arrive without warning, because life had taught them one constant truth: peace was always temporary. Beyond the village, clouds slowly gathered across the night sky. They drifted silently, blocking out the faint light of stars. The air grew colder, sharper, carrying the quiet promise of change. Storms were not rare in this land. They arrived suddenly and without mercy, capable of destroying crops, flooding homes, and pushing survival even closer to its limits. Yet despite this constant threat, the people endured with quiet determination. They had learned to live without certainty, to rest without comfort, to hope without guarantees. And as the last embers of the fires slowly dimmed, the village sank into restless sleep, a fragile pause between one struggle and the next. Because morning would come again, and when it did, the cycle would begin once more. Before dawn could fully arrive, the change came. A distant rumble rolled across the horizon, low and steady, like the sound of the earth itself shifting. At first, it was barely noticeable, blending with the natural sounds of the night, but slowly it grew louder, heavier, impossible to ignore. The wind began to rise, pushing through the fields with sudden force. Dry stalks bent sharply, and loose soil lifted into the air, carried in swirling clouds that moved toward the village. Inside the huts, people stirred uneasily. Sleep broke into fragments as the storm's presence crept closer. Doors creaked under pressure, and small fires flickered wildly, struggling to stay alive. Then came the thunder. It cracked across the sky with overwhelming power, echoing through the valley and shaking the ground beneath every home. Children woke in fear, clinging tightly to their parents. Even the strongest among the villagers felt a tightening in their chests. Because storms in this land were never gentle. Rain followed quickly, heavy, relentless, striking the roofs with a force that sounded like thousands of stones falling at once. Water pushed through cracks in wooden walls, dripping onto floors already worn from years of hardship. Outside, the fields began to flood. Mud formed rapidly, swallowing paths and tools left behind. Crops that had required months of labor bent under the weight of wind and water. Within moments, survival itself felt uncertain. Yet even as the storm raged, the villagers acted without hesitation. Doors were secured, animals were pulled closer to shelter, families gathered tightly together, protecting one another against the cold and fear pressing in from every side. Lightning illuminated the sky in sudden bursts, revealing the fragile nature of everything they depended on. Huts, fences, crops, all vulnerable to forces beyond human control. Still, they endured. They had faced storms before. They had rebuilt after destruction. They had learned that survival required not strength alone, but unity. And as the rain continued to fall without mercy, the village stood together in the darkness, holding on through the night, waiting for the storm to pass. The storm did not end quickly. Through the long night, The rain continued to fall with relentless force, drumming against the earth as though time itself had slowed. Water carved small rivers through the village paths, washing away footprints, tools, and fragile signs of daily life. Inside the huts, no one truly slept. Families sat close together in the dim glow of weak firelight, listening to the wind howl through cracks in the walls. Every thunderclap felt like a warning. Every flash of lightning revealed shadows dancing across tired faces. Outside, the fields suffered in silence. The soil that had once resisted their plows now dissolved into thick, swallowing mud. Carefully planted crops bent lower and lower, some breaking completely under the weight of the storm. Months of labor began disappearing in a single night. For the villagers, this was more than weather. It was the difference between survival and hunger. As dawn slowly approached, the rain finally began to weaken. The thunder grew distant. The violent wind softened into a cold, steady breeze. When the first grey light appeared over the horizon, the villagers stepped outside cautiously. What they saw brought heavy silence. The fields were flooded, wooden fences had collapsed, paths were gone beneath deep layers of mud. Some huts had lost sections of their roofs, leaving interiors exposed to the night's destruction. No one spoke at first. They simply looked. Not with surprise, but with a quiet, familiar sadness. Because this was not the first time, and it would not be the last. Slowly, movement began again. A man lifted a fallen beam. A woman began gathering scattered tools. Children helped clear water from hut entrances using small wooden buckets. There was no command given. No shouting. Only silent understanding. This was how they survived. By rebuilding, again and again. By refusing to surrender to despair. And as the weak morning sun struggled to break through the lingering clouds, the village returned to life, not unchanged, but unbroken. Morning did not bring comfort. It brought clarity. As the clouds slowly parted, a pale sunlight revealed the full truth of the storm's destruction. Water still pooled across the fields, reflecting the grey sky like broken mirrors. Crops lay flattened beneath mud, and many of the carefully planted rows had vanished completely. For a long moment, the village stood still. Not out of weakness, but out of understanding. They knew this moment well, the quiet after loss, when hope feels distant and the future uncertain. An elderly farmer stepped forward first. He bent slowly, pushed his hands deep into the wet soil, and lifted a small clump of earth. Mud dripped between his fingers, but beneath it, tiny green shoots still clung to life. He nodded silently. That small gesture spread through the villagers like a quiet signal. One by one, they moved forward. Not with celebration, not with false optimism, but with determination. They began lifting broken fences, draining standing water, straightening what crops could still be saved. Children carried stones from flooded paths. Women repaired damaged roofs. Men reinforced weak structures. No speeches were given. No leaders shouted commands, because survival here had never depended on words. It depended on endurance, on unity, on the unspoken belief that no matter how many times the world knocked them down, they would rise again. As the sun climbed higher, light slowly warmed the land. Steam rose gently from the wet soil, and the first signs of life returned to the fields. Not fully restored, but alive. And that was enough. Because history is not only written by kings, wars, or great victories. It is written by ordinary people who refuse to give up. By those who endure suffering in silence. By those who rebuild when everything seems lost. And even today, their story continues to echo across time, reminding us that resilience is the true strength of humanity. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on the strength within your own life. Because like them, you have faced storms. And like them, you are still standing. If you believe in the power of resilience, hope, and human endurance, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and join us for more stories that bring history to life.